Every day, thousands of aircraft operate in the ATC system under IFR or Instrument Flight Rules. In order to do so, each aircraft from a Piper Warrior all the way to a 747 must receive a clearance to operate in controlled airspace. Hello, my name is Kyle Warner. I'm an air traffic control student here at the University of North Dakota. We're going to take a look at how aircraft receive an IFR clearance and how controllers issue that clearance today on ATCast.
Thank you. JetBlue 1264 Boston, ground taxi ramp via November and Alpha. Boston Tower, Gulfstream 717, Echo Papa 30 on the ILS 4 right approach. Hey, there's 741 is checking out. 741 Boston Tower, good evening. Thanks for calling 737 distance time Melbourne. I'm like 4 right for the last, touch by 1015. 417, thanks for the service terminates, clock VFR for change, we'll see you way back. Okay, 117, okay, good night now.
Today I'm joined by Dan Lindsay in our 360-degree tower simulator. Dan?
Thanks, Kyle. I'm Dan Lindsay, and in this episode we're going to talk about clearance delivery. Now, this is probably not the most exciting thing you'll do in your time here at UND, but it is one of the most fundamental skills you can learn for a number of reasons. First off, this may be your first exposure to things like airport identifiers, airways, and names of nav aids. Clearance delivery will help you become familiar with the area around Academy Airport, which will be important once you start doing local control and eventually when you go on to take your radar classes. Second, you will use almost this exact same phraseology again in radar classes when you start doing uncontrolled departures. Finally, if you go to a tower facility for the FAA, clearance delivery is probably one of the first things you'll train on. If you go to a radar facility, like a TRACON or a center, you'll still see some of this phraseology when you deal with uncontrolled departures. We're going to talk about three things in today's episode. First, we'll talk about what clearance delivery is and what it means for controllers and pilots. Then we're going to talk about the difference between a full route clearance and a cleared as filed procedure. We'll wrap it up by looking at strip marking and everyone's favorite topic, phraseology. Let's start off by talking about what clearance delivery is and how it works in the air traffic control system. If a pilot wants to conduct an IFR flight, he or she must first file a flight plan. There are a couple different ways to do this. If, say, someone with their own plane wants to fly somewhere IFR, he or she calls flight service and files a flight plan with a briefer. Airlines have an entire department of people whose job is to file flight plans and look at weather. The military branches have their own operations groups that do the same thing. Once a flight plan is filed, it becomes active in the ATC computer system 30 minutes before the pilot's proposed departure time. When that happens, a flight progress strip is generated and prints out at the first facility that will talk to that airplane. When the pilot is ready to depart, he or she has to call for clearance to operate in the ATC system. That's where clearance delivery comes in. If the airport has an operating control tower, the pilot will call either the clearance delivery frequency or the ground frequency. At busy airports like Boston or Los Angeles, there will be a separate clearance delivery frequency. At other airports like Grand Forks, ground control and clearance delivery are done by the same controller on a single frequency. At Academy Airport, you will do both jobs when you work a ground control position. When the pilot calls, the controller will issue that aircraft's IFR clearance. This clearance authorizes the pilot to fly the route specified in the flight plan unless it needs to be amended. More on that later. The controller will also normally issue an initial altitude for the aircraft to maintain. Some airports will use a departure procedure, or a SID, which means standard instrument departure, in order to regulate the flow of traffic. You might think these are the same thing, but there are some important differences. Both provide obstacle clearance for departing aircraft, and both can be part of a filed flight plan. A SID requires an ATC clearance and is flown by IFR departures, whereas a departure procedure does not require a clearance and can be flown by both VFR and IFR departures. Finally, a SID is flown all the way from takeoff into the en route environment, while an aircraft flying a departure procedure may be vectored on course by the departure controller. Academy Airport uses departure procedures, which we'll talk about a little later. The clearance also includes a squawk code for the aircraft. This code identifies the aircraft and its associated information in ATC's computers. This allows the use of secondary radar. As long as the aircraft is squawking its assigned code, radar controllers will be able to see its call sign, aircraft type, and destination airport. Now let's take a look at two different ways to issue a clearance to a pilot and why these two different methods might be used. The first way is called a full route clearance. In this type of clearance, the entire route of flight is read to the pilot. Sometimes pilots may ask for this to confirm their route of flight. In other situations, ATC may need to amend the flight plan. There are a couple reasons that a flight plan might need to be changed. If a nav aid is out of service, the aircraft may need to be routed around it. Weather is another reason flight plans are changed. Some busy facilities, like New York Approach, have what's called preferred routing. That means aircraft entering the airspace of that facility have to be on a certain airway in order to keep traffic organized and separated. Sometimes pilots are not aware of preferred routing and don't file their flight plans correctly, and ATC will have to change it and inform the pilot. If ATC needs a pilot to fly a certain departure procedure, they may amend the flight plan for that reason too. When giving the full route clearance, the controller reads the entire route, which might include nav aids like VORs, TACANs, VORTACs, jet routes, Victor Airways, or combinations of nav aids and airways. Sometimes pilots will also file direct, in which case there may just be a departure and arrival airport on the flight progress strip. We'll talk about how to read a full route clearance in a few minutes. The second method is to clear the aircraft as filed. In this case, the route of flight is not read to the pilot. You can use this method if no changes need to be made to the pilot's flight plan. We're almost done. Let's wrap it up by taking a look at the procedures you'll use in class for strip marking and the phraseology you'll need to know. We'll start off with the general format and phraseology of the clearance itself. Anything that must be read exactly is highlighted in yellow. Whether you're giving a full route clearance or simply clearing an aircraft as filed, the same format will be used. The aircraft's identification, which could be a call sign or an N number. Your facility ID, which at Academy Airport will be Academy Ground, since ground and clearance delivery are done by the same controller. The phrase "cleared to," followed by the name of the destination airport. You have to say the word airport every time. Chicago O'Hare International Airport, San Diego International Airport, Grand Forks Airport, and so on. Then you'll say, via the Collin, Mays, Noble, or Sean departure, depending on which departure gate the aircraft will fly through. You can determine this by looking at the route on the flight progress strip. Page 5 of your tower packet shows which initial fixes determine which departure procedure to issue the pilot. Next you'll say, as filed, or if giving a full route clearance, you'll read the entire route. Then issue the initial altitude for the aircraft. Per the departure procedures, you will say, maintain 5,000. After giving this altitude, tell the pilot to expect his or her filed altitude or flight level 10 minutes after departure. This is done so that if communications are lost for some reason, the pilot can still climb to the filed altitude and then attempt to contact the next facility. The next step is to issue the departure frequency for the sector the aircraft will fly through after takeoff. North is 120.2 or 261.0, and south is 119.5 or 252.6. If you're talking to a military aircraft, you must issue the UHF frequency. By the way, this rule doesn't just apply to clearance delivery. Anytime you give a frequency to a military aircraft, it must be a UHF frequency. The phraseology is departure frequency and then the appropriate frequency. The last step is to give the pilot a squawk code. Like I said before, this is how ATC computer systems identify the aircraft for things like secondary radar information. So it's very important that the aircraft gets the correct code. You'll find the squawk code in block 5 of the flight progress strip. Say the word squawk, followed by the code read as single digits. Pilots must read back the squawk code. I know that sounds like a lot of information, but you'll be surprised at how quickly you can learn the phraseology if you simply sit down and practice. Every IFR clearance you issue follows this exact same format and same phraseology, and with enough repetition it will quickly become second nature. One last bit of phraseology to cover is for the full route clearance. Here's what you need to know if reading the full route to the pilot. Anything with 3 letters is either a VOR, TACAN, NDB, or airport. These are stated as the city or airport which they serve. For example, TUL, which will be the very first fix for any aircraft departing Academy Airport, is the Tulsa VORTAC, and is read in the clearance as Tulsa. Sometimes one of these might be both an airport and a nav aid. If the 3-letter identifier is at the very end of the route of flight, it is an airport, because hopefully the airplane isn't going to land on a VOR. If it appears somewhere in the middle, it's a nav aid. Take OKC for example. OKC is both an airport and a VOR. If it appears at the end of the route of flight, the aircraft is heading to Will Rogers Airport, and you would read it exactly that way. But if it appears in the middle of the route, the Oklahoma City VOR is just one of the fixes along the aircraft's route, and you would simply say Oklahoma City. Anything with 5 letters is either an intersection, a DME fix, or a GPS waypoint. They are nearly always read as they are spelled. Let's look at a couple you'll encounter. This would be read as Colin. This would be read as Maze. And this would be read as Packer. Anything with a V or J followed by a number is an airway. These are called Victor airways and are low-altitude airways generally used by smaller prop-driven aircraft. This would be read as Victor 14, Victor 101, Victor 112. You get the idea. J's are jet routes, which are at higher altitudes and are used by, you guessed it, jet aircraft. They are read like the Victor airways, except that you don't say Juliet. Just say J and the numbers that follow. J155, J167, and so on. You'll notice if you look at a map of airways that the Victor airways and jet routes seem to follow the same path between nav aids. They do. The only difference is the altitudes they occupy. Jet routes start in the flight levels, and Victor airways lie in the altitudes underneath. Here's an example of a route of flight from Block 9 of a flight progress strip. In fact, it's the same one printed on page 6 of your tower packet. This route would be read like this. Via the Collin departure procedure, J123, Miami, J155. Leave out the destination airport since you already said that at the beginning of the clearance. If 2 fixes appear next to each other like this, with no airway in between them, you say direct. In this case, it would be Miami, direct Ponca City, Victor 2. If this happens with the destination airport, you would read the last fix and then say direct. Let's change the previous example around slightly to demonstrate. This route of flight would be read Miami, Victor 2, Ponca City, direct. I know this is a lot of information, but remember that with enough practice you can get this down pretty fast. Let's listen to a couple examples of clearance delivery.
US Air 590 Academy ground cleared to Boston International Airport via the Collin departure procedure. J123 Miami, J157 Kansas City, J133 Buffalo direct. Maintain 5,000. Expect flight level 270, 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency 120.2, squawk 0702.
Northwest 989 Heavy, Academy ground, cleared to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport via the Collin departure procedure as filed. Maintain 5,000. Expect flight level 290, 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency 120.2, squawk 0526.
November 12 Echo Romeo Academy ground cleared to Fayetteville Airport via the Collin departure procedure as filed. Maintain 5,000. Expect 7,000 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency 120.2, squawk 4033.
Tank 52, Academy ground, cleared to Memphis Airport via the Maze departure procedure. J106 Fort Smith, J106. Maintain 5,000. Expect flight level 210, 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency 261.0, squawk 0002.
The last thing we need to go over is strip marking. Believe it or not, after all the talking for the clearance itself, there are only 4 things you need to write on the strip. First of all, when the aircraft makes its initial call to you, the pilot should indicate that he or she has the current ATIS. They do this by saying the letter of the current information. They may say something like with Charlie, or information Charlie, or simply Charlie. As long as they say it and it's the correct letter, you're good to go. If the pilot doesn't say or you aren't sure, ask them if they have information Charlie, or whatever the current letter is. Military pilots may call up and say negative ATIS. If this happens, read them the runways in use, wind, and the altimeter in that order. You don't need to read them the entire ATIS. Write the letter of the ATIS in block 10 if the pilot has the ATIS. For military pilots, write WX in the same block. The next thing is to write what type of clearance you issued. If it's a full route clearance, write FRC here in the bottom left corner of block 9. If you cleared the aircraft as filed, write CAF instead. When the pilot reads back the clearance, put a check mark here in block 13. That's all I've got for you today. Don't forget that you can check out SATCA's page on HTML-EZ for a practice quiz on today's material or for any of the other episodes in this series. Back to you, Kyle.
Thanks, Dan. On behalf of UND Air Traffic Control, the Student Air Traffic Controller Association, and the Aerospace Network, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. My name is Kyle Warner. Frequency change approved.
For more information on UND Air Traffic Control and to see other videos in this series, visit www.aero.und.edu or search for ATCast on iTunes University.